The morning sun filtered weakly through the tall windows of Courtroom 4B in the Denver Municipal Courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. The air hung heavy with anticipation, and the faint scent of old wood polish mixed with anxiety. Sarah sat rigidly at the plaintiff's table, her spine straight as a rod, though everything inside her trembled like leaves in a storm. Her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, had gone white at the knuckles. Beside her, perched on the hard wooden chair with a booster seat, sat 3-year-old Emma, a small girl with golden curls that bounced with every tiny movement and wide blue eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her with innocent curiosity. Sarah glanced at her daughter, attempting a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Emma looked adorable in her little pink dress with white flowers, the one Sarah had carefully chosen that morning, hoping it would present the image of a well-cared-for, happy child. But beneath that carefully constructed appearance, Sarah's heart hammered against her like a caged bird desperate for freedom. This custody hearing would determine everything, whether Emma would continue living primarily with her, or whether she'd be forced to share equal time with David, her ex-husband who sat across the aisle with an expression that made Sarah's stomach turn. David looked every bit the successful businessman in his tailored navy suit and crimson tie. His dark hair was slicked back perfectly, and he wore an expression of casual confidence that bordered on arrogance. His attorney, a sharp-featured woman named with steel-gray hair and glasses that glinted under the fluorescent lights, sat beside him shuffling through papers with practiced efficiency. They both looked prepared, polished, and completely sure of victory. David had money, resources, and a legal team that had already cost Sarah most of her savings just to counter. The courtroom itself felt oppressive despite its spacious dimensions. Dark wood paneling climbed the walls to meet the high ceiling. The Colorado state seal hung prominently behind the judge's bench, a constant reminder of the authority and weight of the decisions made in this room. Rows of wooden benches sat mostly empty behind the litigants. This wasn't a trial that attracted spectators, just the quiet devastation of a family being torn apart by legal proceedings. Judge entered through her chamber's door, her black robe flowing behind her as she took her position at the elevated bench. She was a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Her face carried the weathered expression of someone who had presided over countless difficult cases, who had heard every excuse and seen every manipulation tactic in the book. Her reputation preceded her, fair but firm, compassionate but not easily fooled. "All rise," the bailiff announced, his voice echoing in the quiet space. Everyone stood, the shuffle of feet and rustle of clothing the only sounds. Emma tugged on her mother's hand, confused by the formality. Sarah gently squeezed back, a silent message. "Just a little longer, sweetheart." "Please be seated," Judge said, settling into her high-backed leather chair. She opened the file before her, scanning the documents with practiced eyes. "We're here today for the custody modification hearing in the matter of versus. Counselors, are both parties present and ready to proceed?" Both attorneys affirmed their readiness. Sarah's lawyer, an overworked but dedicated family law attorney named James, no relation to the judge, gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. He'd warned her that these hearings were unpredictable, that judges had wide discretion, and that David's clean record and financial stability made him look good on paper. What the papers didn't show, what Sarah had struggled for months to prove, was the gnawing feeling in her gut that something wasn't right during Emma's visits with her father. The little girl would come home different, withdrawn, anxious, sometimes mentioning things that didn't make sense. Scary people at Daddy's house. Loud noises that hurt my ears. Dogs that weren't nice like our dog. But Emma was only 3, and 3-year-olds had active imaginations. Or so David's attorney had argued in every motion, painting Sarah as a bitter ex-wife trying to alienate the child from her father. Emma squirmed in her seat, her little legs swinging back and forth, not quite reaching the floor even with the booster. She clutched a small stuffed rabbit that Sarah had allowed her to bring for comfort. The courtroom was boring to a toddler, all serious faces and hushed tones and words she didn't understand. She looked around the room with growing restlessness, her attention drifting from the judge to the strange seal on the wall to the people in the back rows. Judge began reviewing the case details, her voice measured and professional. She outlined the divorce decree from 18 months prior, the current custody arrangement that gave Sarah primary physical custody, with David having visitation every other weekend and one evening per week. David was now petitioning for a 50-50 split, arguing that Emma needed equal time with both parents and that Sarah was being unreasonably restrictive. As the judge spoke, Sarah felt her throat tighten. She'd been a good mother, devoted, attentive, sacrificing her own career advancement to ensure Emma had stability after the divorce. But David had the bigger house, the better job, the appearance of the perfect father who was being unfairly kept from his daughter. Then, just as was about to make her opening statement, the side door of the courtroom creaked open. The sound cut through the proceedings like a knife, and every head turned toward the interruption. Officer stepped through the doorway, his police uniform crisp and professional, his utility belt laden with the tools of his trade. But it wasn't the officer who captured everyone's attention. It was his partner, Duke, a magnificent German shepherd with a thick coat of tan and black fur, intelligent dark eyes, and an alert posture that spoke of years of professional training, walked beside Officer with perfect heel discipline. The K-9's presence immediately transformed the atmosphere of the room. Duke was a 5-year veteran of the Denver Police Department's K-9 unit, specializing in narcotics detection and search and rescue operations. His muscular frame and attentive demeanor radiated both power and control. A vest marked Police K-9 stretched across his chest, and his ears swiveled constantly, taking in every sound in the unfamiliar environment. Officer nodded apologetically to Judge. "Sorry, Your Honor, we're scheduled for the 10:30 case. I thought we'd wait in here quietly rather than in the hallway." Judge waved her hand in acknowledgement. "That's fine, officer. Please take a seat in the back. We should be finished shortly." Guided Duke to the last row of benches, where the dog settled into a sitting position with professional calm. They were early for a drug trafficking case on the docket after this custody hearing, a routine day for the K-9 unit. But for little Emma, nothing about this moment was routine. The instant Duke entered the room, Emma's entire body went rigid. Her small hands gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white just like her mother's had been moments before. Her breathing became shallow and quick. The stuffed rabbit dropped from her hands onto the floor, forgotten. Sarah felt her daughter tense beside her and looked down in concern, but Emma's eyes were locked on something across the room, fixed on the German shepherd with an intensity that seemed impossible for such a young child. Something about that dog, about its size, its coloring, its very presence had triggered something deep in Emma's memory, something frightening, something bad. Judge continued speaking, unaware of the small drama unfolding at the plaintiff's table. David glanced back at the dog with mild interest before returning his attention to his attorney. The court reporter's fingers flew across her stenography machine. The bailiff stood stoically by the door. And Emma's tiny heart raced faster and faster as a memory, fragmented, confusing, terrifying, began to surface in her young mind. A memory of another dog that looked like Duke. A memory of her daddy's house. A memory of scary people and loud voices and something very, very wrong. What happened next would change everything. Emma's small chest rose and fell with rapid, shallow breaths. Her blue eyes, usually so full of childish wonder and innocence, had taken on a glazed quality, the look of someone transported to another time and place. Sarah noticed the change immediately. As a mother, she'd learned to read every nuance of her daughter's expressions, every subtle shift in mood or behavior. This was different from Emma's usual restlessness or boredom. This was fear. "Emma, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, leaning closer to her daughter. She placed a gentle hand on the little girl's shoulder, but Emma didn't respond. She remained frozen, transfixed, staring at Duke with an intensity that sent chills down Sarah's spine. The 3-year-old's tiny fingers had gone white where they gripped the edge of the table, and a small tremor ran through her body. Judge was mid-sentence, discussing the legal standards for custody modifications, when Emma's small voice cut through the formal proceedings like a siren in the night. "Doggy," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper at first, then louder, "Doggy." Several heads turned. Sarah tried to quiet her daughter, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Emma, honey, we need to be quiet right now. Remember what Mommy told you." But Emma wasn't listening. Something had unlocked in her young mind. Some door that had been firmly shut was now swinging open, and behind it were memories she couldn't fully articulate but could certainly feel. The fear was rising in her throat like bile, making her heart pound so hard she could hear it in her ears. Judge paused, her reading glasses sliding down her nose as she looked over them toward the plaintiff's table. "Mrs., is there a problem?" "I'm so sorry, Your Honor," Sarah stammered, her voice tight with stress and mortification. "She's just Emma, please." Emma's small body began to tremble more violently now. The stuffed rabbit lay forgotten on the floor beneath her chair. Her breathing came in short gasps. And then, before Sarah could stop her, before anyone in the courtroom could anticipate what was about to happen, Emma wriggled free from her mother's gentle, restraining hand. The 3-year-old slid off her chair with surprising speed, her pink dress rustling as her small feet hit the floor. In the formal, quiet atmosphere of the courtroom, every movement seemed. The sound of her patent leather shoes on the polished wood floor echoed like gunshots. She stood in the open space between the plaintiff's and defendant's tables, her small frame dwarfed by the massive furniture and high ceilings around her. Emma's right arm shot up, her tiny index finger pointing with absolute certainty. Her face had gone pale except for 2 spots of color high on her cheeks. Tears welled in her eyes, threatening to spill over. And then she spoke, her child's voice ringing out clearly in the stunned silence of the courtroom. "Bad man." The 2 words hung in the air like an accusation, like a verdict, like a prophecy. Every person in that courtroom, the judge, the attorneys, the bailiff, the court reporter, Sarah, David, officer, everyone froze. Time seemed to suspend itself in that moment, holding its breath. Sarah's face drained of all color. She lunged forward, trying to reach Emma, trying to scoop her up and somehow make this mortifying situation go away. "Emma, no, sweetheart, come here right now." But Emma remained rooted to the spot, her arms still extended, finger still pointing. "Bad man, she repeated, her voice rising with each repetition, taking on a note of panic that made the hair on the back of Sarah's neck stand up. David's face transformed from its earlier confident smugness to indignant outrage in a matter of seconds. His jaw clenched and he half rose from his seat. "What is she doing? Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. Sarah has obviously coached her too." "I did no such thing," Sarah cried out, her professional composure crumbling entirely. Tears sprang to her eyes, tears of embarrassment, confusion, and a strange sense of vindication she couldn't quite name. Her daughter was having a meltdown in court, potentially destroying any chance Sarah had of maintaining primary custody, yet some instinct told her this wasn't just a tantrum. "I don't know why she's doing this." David's attorney seized the moment like a shark scenting blood in the water. She stood up, her voice sharp and commanding. "Your Honor, this outburst clearly demonstrates the unstable and manipulative environment Mrs. is providing for this child. The fact that she would bring an obviously distressed child to court, possibly even coaching her to create this scene." "That's a lie," Sarah's attorney, James, jumped to his feet. "My client has done nothing of the sort. The child is clearly upset, but—" Judge's gavel came down hard, the sharp crack of wood on wood silencing the erupting chaos. "Order! Everyone will sit down and be quiet, or I will clear this courtroom." Her voice carried the weight of decades on the bench, the authority of someone who would tolerate no further disruption. The attorneys sat. David sank back into his chair, though his face remained flushed with anger. Sarah stood uncertainly, torn between obeying the judge and comforting her daughter. But Emma, little Emma with her curls and pink dress and tear-filled eyes, Emma didn't sit down. She didn't stop pointing. She didn't stop crying out those two words that seemed to echo from somewhere deep in her traumatized memory. Bad man, bad man, bad man. Officer, who had been sitting quietly in the back with Duke, observing the proceedings with the detached professionalism of someone used to courtroom duty, felt his instincts kick in. Something about this situation wasn't right. He'd been a police officer for 17 years, a K-9 handler for 12 of those, and he'd learned to trust his gut. Children didn't typically react this way without cause. He glanced down at Duke, who had been sitting calmly throughout the earlier proceedings, but now the German shepherd's demeanor had changed subtly. Duke's ears were perked forward, fully alert. His dark eyes were fixed not on the crying child but scanning the room with heightened awareness. The dog's nostrils flared, testing the air, his head turning slightly as if tracking a scent. His hand automatically went to Duke's back, feeling the tension in his partner's muscles. Something had caught the K-9's attention. Something had triggered his training. Judge leaned forward, her earlier irritation giving way to genuine concern. She'd presided over hundreds of custody cases involving young children, and she knew the difference between a coached performance and genuine distress. This little girl was terrified of something, and her timing, pointing and shouting the moment a police dog entered the room, was unusual enough to warrant attention. "Mrs. Judge said, her voice softer now, please approach and take your daughter." Sarah moved quickly, gathering Emma into her arms. The little girl buried her face against her mother's shoulder, still pointing with one hand extended over Sarah's back, still trembling, still crying. But as Sarah turned, Emma's outstretched finger shifted direction. Several people in the courtroom noticed it simultaneously. Emma wasn't pointing at Duke anymore. Her finger had moved, tracking across the room like a compass needle finding true north. It swept past Officer, past the empty benches, past the court reporter and bailiff, and it came to rest pointing directly at the defendant's table. Pointing directly at David. Emma's tear-stained face emerged from her mother's shoulder just long enough to cry out one more time, her voice breaking with emotion. "Bad man there. Daddy, bad man." The courtroom erupted into chaos once again, but this time something had fundamentally shifted. Because Officer had seen where the child was pointing, and more importantly, he'd seen how Duke was reacting. The German shepherd had risen to his feet, his body tense, his full attention focused on David. Duke's nose worked the air currents flowing through the courtroom ventilation system. And then, in a movement so subtle that only a trained handler would notice, Duke's tail stopped wagging entirely. That was the first signal. Something was very, very wrong. Judge's hand hovered over her gavel, but she didn't bring it down. Something in the child's raw terror, something in the way the little girl's accusation had shifted from the police dog to her own father, had triggered the judge's finely tuned instincts. In her 23 years on the bench, she developed an almost preternatural ability to sense when something lurked beneath the surface of a case, when the official documents and polished attorneys' arguments didn't tell the whole story. This was one of those moments. David shot to his feet, his face now crimson with rage. "This is absolutely ridiculous. Your Honor, my ex-wife has clearly put our daughter up to this. She's been trying to poison Emma against me since the divorce." His voice cracked with indignation, but there was something else there too, something that might have been panic, barely contained beneath the outrage. Placed a restraining hand on her client's arm, her sharp eyes darting between the judge, the child, and the police officer in the back. She'd been practicing family law for 30 years, and she knew when a case was starting to slip sideways. "Your Honor, I must object to this circus. A 3-year-old child's random outburst cannot be given weight in these proceedings. She's confused, probably frightened by the formal setting, and the child specifically pointed at your client, Ms. Judge interrupted, her voice cutting through the attorney's protests like a scalpel. That's not random. That's specific. Sarah held Emma close, the little girl's body still trembling against her chest. Emma's face was buried in her mother's neck now, her small arms wrapped tightly around Sarah like she was afraid of being pulled away. Sarah's mind raced. For months she'd tried to tell people that something was wrong during Emma's visits with David. The nightmares, the anxiety, the strange things Emma would say about scary people and mean dogs at Daddy's house. But everyone had dismissed her concerns. The court-appointed custody evaluator had labeled her potentially alienating. David's attorney had painted her as a bitter ex-wife. Even her own lawyer had warned her that without concrete evidence, her suspicions would only make her look vindictive. And now here was Emma, terrified in a courtroom, pointing at her father and calling him bad man. Officer stood slowly, his movements deliberate and professional. Duke rose with him, the German shepherd's attention still locked on David with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. In 12 years of K9 handling, had learned to read his partner's body language as fluently as he read English. Every tilt of Duke's head, every shift of his weight, every change in his breathing pattern communicated something important. And right now, Duke was telling him something was very, very wrong with the man sitting at the defendant's table. Your Honor, said, his voice calm but carrying across the courtroom, may I approach the bench? Judge studied the officer for a long moment. She could see the tension in his posture, the way his hand rested protectively on the K9's back. She'd worked with enough law enforcement over the years to recognize when a trained officer's instincts were firing. Approach, officer. Walked forward, Duke moving in perfect heel position beside him. As they passed closer to the defendant's table, Duke's behavior became more pronounced. The dog's ears were fully forward, his nose working the air with increasing intensity. His gait slowed slightly, his head turning fractionally toward David. David noticed. His eyes followed the dog with an expression that flickered between contempt and something else, wariness perhaps, fear. When reached the bench, he spoke quietly, though in the acoustics of the courtroom, everyone could hear fragments of his words. Your Honor, I need to inform you that my K9 partner is exhibiting detection behavior. He's trained in narcotics detection, and his body language suggests he's caught a scent. The courtroom went deadly silent. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Narcotics. The word seemed to hover in the air like smoke. Emma had mentioned strange smells at Daddy's house, smells that made her nose hurt. Sarah had assumed it was cleaning products or something mundane. But what if? Was on her feet in an instant. Your Honor, this is completely improper. Officer and his dog are here for an entirely different case. There's no probable cause whatsoever to suggest that my client. The dog doesn't lie, counselor, said evenly. He's trained to alert on specific scents. He's not giving me a full alert yet, but his behavior indicates he's detecting something worth investigating. David's hands gripped the edge of the table. This is harassment. I'm a respected member of the community, a business owner. You can't just. Judge raised her hand, silencing him. Her expression had gone from concerned to absolutely serious. She'd presided over enough drug cases to know that K9 alerts, when properly handled, were legitimate investigative tools. More than that, she'd seen enough custody battles to know when a parent was hiding something significant. The pieces were starting to form a picture, and it was an ugly one. Mr. Judge said slowly, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I advise you to answer truthfully. Have you had any contact with illegal substances? Absolutely not. David's response came too quickly, too forcefully. Your Honor, I don't have to sit here and be accused of. Duke suddenly sat. It was a controlled, deliberate movement, the exact position he'd been trained to take when confirming a detection. His dark eyes remained fixed on David, and he lifted his right paw slightly off the ground. Officer's expression hardened. "Your Honor, that's a positive alert. Duke is indicating the presence of narcotics." The courtroom exploded into chaos, was shouting objections about proper procedure and unlawful searches. James, Sarah's attorney, was demanding that the court take immediate protective action for the child. The bailiff moved closer to the defendant's table, his hand instinctively moving toward his duty belt. Sarah felt dizzy. Emma's little body pressed against her, the child's rapid heartbeat matching her own. Everything was happening so fast, yet it all felt like slow motion. The truth she'd been trying to uncover for months was suddenly rushing toward the surface like a breached submarine, explosive and undeniable. Judge's gavel came down 3 times, hard and fast. "Order! I will have order in this courtroom." When the noise subsided to tense murmurs, she continued, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Based on the K-9's alert and the child's reaction, I'm establishing probable cause for a security screening. Bailiff, please escort Mr. to a private screening room." "You can't do this," David shouted, his composure finally shattering completely. He backed away from the bailiff who approached him. "I have rights. You need a warrant." "The K-9 alert in a public courthouse provides sufficient probable cause for a security screening," Judge stated firmly. "You can cooperate, or you can be held in contempt. Your choice, mister." Looked stricken. She'd built her case on the assumption that David was exactly what he appeared to be, a successful businessman and devoted father being unfairly restricted from his daughter. If drugs were involved, everything changed. Child endangerment, unfit parent, potential criminal charges. The bailiff reached David, who jerked away from his touch. "Don't put your hands on me. This is illegal, this is." 2 more courthouse security officers appeared, responding to the bailiff's silent signal. David looked around wildly, trapped. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling like sand, and everyone could see the desperation beneath. Officer moved Duke back toward the wall, giving the security team space to work. The German shepherd's tail was still, his attention unwavering. Had seen this scenario play out dozens of times, the denial, the outrage, the inevitable collapse when the truth became inescapable. Sarah watched them lead David toward the side door, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. Emma peeked out from her mother's shoulder, her tear-stained face confused but somehow relieved, as if a terrible weight was finally being acknowledged. Judge turned to Sarah. "Mrs., I'm calling a recess in these proceedings pending the results of the security screening. You and your daughter may wait in my chambers where it's more comfortable. Officer, I'll need you and your K-9 to assist with the screening." Nodded, "Of course, Your Honor." As David was escorted from the courtroom, still protesting loudly, Emma lifted her small head and whispered something into her mother's ear, words that made Sarah's blood run cold. The doggy at Daddy's house looked like that doggy. The scary men had dogs too. Everything clicked into place in that moment. Emma hadn't been afraid of Duke. She'd been triggered by the memory of other dogs, drug dogs, guard dogs, dogs belonging to people involved in David's hidden activities. Activities that had exposed their 3-year-old daughter to dangers Sarah had only begun to imagine. And now, finally, someone was listening. The security screening room was located in the basement of the courthouse, a windowless space painted institutional beige with fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. It smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee, and the cinder block walls seemed to absorb sound, creating an oppressive atmosphere that made even innocent people feel guilty. David stood in the center of the room, his expensive suit now rumpled, his carefully styled hair disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's cool temperature. Officer entered with Duke, the German Shepherd's claws clicking against the linoleum floor. Two courthouse security officers flanked the doorway: Mike, a barrel-chested man with 20 years of experience, and Jennifer Park, a sharp-eyed woman who'd recently transferred from TSA. Both watched David with the practiced neutrality of people who'd seen every type of person try to talk their way out of trouble. "This is a violation of my rights," David said, his voice hoarse from shouting. "I'm calling my lawyer. I'm filing a complaint. You can't just—" "Mister," interrupted calmly, "you're in a public courthouse. A trained narcotics detection dog has given a positive alert in your presence. That establishes probable cause for a security screening. You can cooperate or you can be arrested for obstruction. Those are your options." David's jaw clenched. His eyes darted around the room looking for an exit, an argument, anything that might get him out of this situation. He'd been so careful, so meticulous. How had it all gone wrong so fast? A custody hearing, a routine custody hearing. That's all this was supposed to be. Show up, look presentable, let his lawyer do the talking, and walk away with shared custody. 50-50 time with Emma meant less child support, more control, and the appearance of being a devoted father. But that dog, that damn dog had ruined everything. Gave Duke the command to search, a subtle hand signal that meant work the room. The German Shepherd immediately began his methodical scan, moving in a grid pattern that had trained him to follow. Duke's nose worked constantly, processing thousands of scent molecules per second, filtering through cologne, cleaning products, body odor, and the lingering smells of hundreds of people who'd been in this room before. David watched the dog with barely concealed terror. His hands trembled slightly, and he shoved them into his pockets to hide it. "I want my attorney present for this." "Ms. is welcome to observe," officer said from his position by the door. "But this screening is happening now, with or without her." Duke circled David once, twice, his movement fluid and professional. Watched his partner with the focus of a conductor reading sheet music, seeing meanings in every subtle shift that the untrained eye would miss. Duke's breathing pattern had changed, shorter, more rapid. His ears were pitched forward at maximum attention. His tail, which normally carried a slight wag even during work, was absolutely still. Those were the signs had learned to read over thousands of training hours and hundreds of real-world deployments. Duke wasn't just interested. Duke had found something. The German Shepherd completed his circle and sat directly in front of David, his dark eyes locked on the man's torso. Duke lifted his right paw, the final confirmation signal. "Positive alert," announced. "Mister, I'm going to need you to empty your pockets and place all items on the table." David's face had gone from red to ashen. "I don't have anything. The dog is wrong. Dogs make mistakes all the time, don't they? I read about false positives." "Duke's accuracy rate is 97%, said flatly. "Empty your pockets, now." For a long moment, David didn't move. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in. His mind raced through scenarios, calculations, possible explanations. Maybe he'd touched something at work. Maybe someone at the gym had contaminated his clothes. Maybe. "Mister, if you don't comply, we'll do this the hard way," Officer Park said, her hand moving to her radio. "Your choice." David's shoulders sagged in defeat. With shaking hands, he began removing items from his pockets. Wallet, phone, keys, a few business cards, a money clip with several $100 bills. He placed each item on the metal table with deliberate care, as if by moving slowly he could somehow delay the inevitable. "Keep going," instructed. "All pockets, front, back, jacket." David reached into his inner jacket pocket and hesitated. His hand remained inside the pocket, frozen, as if touching something that burned. His breathing had become rapid and shallow. A thin sheen of sweat now covered his entire face. "What's in that pocket, mister?" His voice remained calm, but his body tensed, ready to respond if David tried anything stupid. It's nothing, just," David's voice cracked. "Look, I can explain, it's not what you think." Duke remained sitting at alert position, his attention never wavering from David's jacket pocket. The dog's nose twitched, and a low whine emerged from his throat, the sound Duke made when the scent was particularly strong, and he was eager for his reward for a correct alert. "Remove your hand from your pocket slowly," officer commanded, moving away from the door, his posture shifting to tactical readiness. "Place whatever you're holding on the table." The room held its breath. David's hand emerged from his jacket pocket clutching a small plastic bag, roughly the size of a credit card but thicker. Inside the clear plastic, a white crystalline substance caught the fluorescent light. Even from across the room could identify it: methamphetamine, probably a half-gram, maybe more. "Oh God," David whispered, staring at the bag in his hand as if seeing it for the first time. "Oh God, I'm so stupid." Officer Park was already calling it in on her radio. "Security to Screening Room B, we have a confirmed drug possession. Need additional officers and evidence collection." Moved forward, Duke following at his heel. "Mister, place the bag on the table and step back with your hands visible." David mechanically, his movements robotic. The bag landed on the metal table with a small plastic sound that seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. As soon as it left his hand, reality seemed to crash down on him like a physical weight. His knees buckled slightly, and he grabbed the edge of the table for support. "That's not all, is it?" asked quietly. It wasn't really a question. Duke's continued alert posture suggested there was more to find. David's laugh was bitter and broken. "Does it matter? I'm finished anyway." "Where else?" pressed. "Your car, your home." At the mention of home, David's eyes widened in fresh panic. "My house? Emma can't go to my house. Theirs. She can't." He stopped himself, but it was too late. The admission hung in the air like a confession. "What's at your house, mister?" officer asked, pulling out handcuffs. David slumped against the table, all fight draining out of him. "I need to make a deal. I need to talk to a prosecutor. I'll tell you everything, but I need a deal." Exchanged glances with the security officers. This had escalated from a simple possession to something much bigger. David wasn't just a user carrying personal amounts. He was talking like someone with something substantial to trade, which meant he was involved in distribution, maybe manufacturing. "You have the right to remain silent," began, moving to handcuff David. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the Miranda warning continued, knelt beside Duke, scratching the German shepherd behind the ears. "Good boy," he murmured. "Good boy, Duke." He reached into his utility belt and pulled out Duke's reward toy, a small rubber ball that the dog loved more than anything. Duke took the toy gently in his mouth, his tail finally wagging, proud of his successful detection. The door opened, and Judge entered, her expression grave. She changed from her judicial robe into a regular blazer, and she carried a file folder. Behind her stood Sarah, without Emma. The little girl was being cared for by a victim's advocate in another room. "What did you find?" Judge asked, though the handcuffed man and the bag of drugs on the table told most of the story. "Methamphetamine, Your Honor," reported. "Approximately half a gram on his person. He's indicated there's more at his residence, and he wants to make a statement in exchange for a deal." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Emma was there. My baby was in a house with drugs. I knew something was wrong. I knew it." Judge placed a firm hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Mrs., your daughter is safe now, and I can assure you she won't be going back to that house." She turned to David, her expression harder than steel. "Mister, you've just lost more than your custody case. You're facing criminal charges that could put you away for years." David looked up, his face a mask of despair and resignation. Through the haze of his catastrophic mistake, one thought kept circling his mind. It was the dog and his daughter's two simple words: "Bad man." She'd been right all along. Within 30 minutes, the Denver Municipal Courthouse had transformed into a command center. The custody hearing that had begun as a routine family law matter was now the epicenter of a criminal investigation that had multiple law enforcement agencies coordinating in the building's conference rooms. Detective Sarah from the Denver Police Department's Narcotics Division arrived first, her detective shield clipped to her belt, her expression all business. She'd been in the middle of surveillance on another case when she got the call about a drug arrest at the courthouse involving a K-9 alert. Now, looking at David through the one-way glass of the observation room, she saw something that made her instincts fire. This wasn't just a user. This was someone scared enough to deal. "Tell me what we have," detective said to officer, who stood beside her with Duke resting at his feet. The German Shepherd was off duty now, his reward toy still clutched happily in his mouth, but his ears perked up at the sound of voices, always alert, always ready. Walked her through the sequence of events, the custody hearing, the child's reaction, Duke's initial interest, the screening, and the discovery of methamphetamine in David's possession. He mentioned there's more at his residence. He started talking about making a deal before we even finished Miranda. Nodded slowly, her mind already working through the implications. That means he's not small time. People don't ask for deals unless they have something substantial to trade. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. They'd need a search warrant for David's residence, and they'd need it fast. Evidence had a way of disappearing when people got arrested, friends, associates, partners in crime all scattering like roaches when the lights came on. In another room down the hall, Judge sat with Sarah and Sarah's attorney, James. Emma was in a child-friendly interview room being gently questioned by a specialist from Child Protective Services, a woman trained to extract information from traumatized children without causing further harm. Sarah looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Her hands shook as she held a styrofoam cup of terrible courthouse coffee that she hadn't actually drunk. "My baby was in that house," Sarah kept repeating, her voice hollow. "I sent her to that house every other weekend. What did she see? What was she exposed to?" Judge's expression was compassionate but firm. "Mrs., what matters now is that she's safe and you're taking the right steps. Your instincts were correct, even if you couldn't prove it before today." James was already on his laptop, typing furiously. "Your Honor, I'm filing an emergency motion for immediate sole custody with supervised visitation only. Though given the circumstances, I doubt Mr. will be granted any visitation rights at all. We'll also be requesting a full investigation into any harm Emma may have suffered during her time at her father's residence." Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I told people something was wrong. The custody evaluator said I was being alienating. David's lawyer made me sound crazy, but I knew. A mother knows when something isn't right with her child." Judge reached across and squeezed Sarah's hand. "You did everything right, Mrs. You kept detailed records. You raised your concerns through proper channels, and most importantly, you kept fighting for your daughter even when people dismissed you. That's what good mothers do." Down in the holding cells, David sat on a metal bench with his head in his hands. He'd been processed, fingerprinted, photographed, and charged with possession of a controlled substance. His one phone call had gone to his attorney, who had delivered the news he'd been dreading. She was withdrawing from his case immediately. Family law attorneys didn't represent criminal defendants, especially not in cases involving drugs and child endangerment. He was on his own now. The door opened, and Detective entered with a folder under her arm. She pulled out the chair across from David and sat down, studying him with the cool assessment of someone who'd interviewed hundreds of suspects. "Mr., I'm Detective, Narcotics Division. You've indicated you want to make a statement." David looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "I need a deal. I need protection. If they find out I talked." "Slow down," interrupted. "Before we discuss any deals, I need to know what you're offering. Talk to me about your involvement." David took a shaky breath. I'm not a dealer, not really. I mean, I started using about a year ago. Work stress, the divorce, everything was falling apart. Someone at my gym connected me with a supplier. He paused, running his hands through his hair. Then I couldn't pay. I owed too much. They said I could work off the debt by storing product at my house and making some deliveries. That's all. I never manufactured anything, never sold to kids, nothing like that. His expression didn't change, but internally she was calculating. Storage and distribution. That meant David's house likely contained a significant quantity of drugs. How much product are we talking about? I don't know exactly, maybe a couple pounds, different stuff. Meth, some cocaine pills, they rotate inventory through my place every few weeks. David's voice dropped to a whisper. There are other people involved, dangerous people. If I give you names, I need protection, witness protection or something. We'll discuss protection after we verify your information, said. Right now, I need you to give me permission to search your residence, or I need enough information to get a warrant. Which is it going to be? David hesitated. Once he gave them access to his house, there was no going back. His life as he knew it was over. But then he thought about Emma's face in the courtroom, pointing at him, calling him bad man. His daughter, his own daughter, was afraid of him. She'd been in that house, surrounded by drugs and criminals and danger, and he'd let it happen because he was weak, because he'd made one bad choice after another until he was drowning. You have my permission, he said quietly. Search the house. Take whatever you find, just make sure Emma never has to go back there. Nodded and stood. Write down your address and the location of the drugs in your residence. Draw a map if you need to. The more cooperative you are, the better it looks for you when we talk to the DA about a deal. As she left the holding cell, was already calling for a tactical team. If David was telling the truth about the quantity of drugs at his residence, they'd need to execute the search warrant with multiple officers. There might be other people at the location. There might be weapons. This had escalated from a simple possession case to a potentially significant bust. Officer was waiting in the hallway with Duke when emerged. We're going to need your partner, she said. David has given permission for a search of his residence. Says there's approximately 2 pounds of various controlled substances. I want Duke there to make sure we don't miss anything. Nodded, his hand automatically going to Duke's head to scratch behind his ears. When do we roll? As soon as I have the tactical team assembled, probably within the hour. Looked down at the German shepherd, who gazed back at her with intelligent, attentive eyes. Your partner just broke open what looks like a significant distribution operation. He's getting a steak dinner tonight. Smiled slightly. He prefers chicken, actually. By 2:00 p.m., a convoy of police vehicles was heading toward David's address in a quiet suburban neighborhood 30 minutes from downtown Denver. The house was a well-maintained 2-story colonial with a manicured lawn and a playground set in the backyard, the kind of place where you'd never suspect illegal activity. That was probably why David's suppliers had chosen it. The tactical team secured the perimeter first. No one was home. David had been living alone since the divorce, and Emma only visited on scheduled weekends. Officer and Duke waited until the house was cleared, then entered to begin their methodical search. Duke's nose would find what human eyes might miss: drugs hidden in walls, under floorboards, in ventilation shafts. It took Duke less than 5 minutes to alert in the master bedroom. Behind a false panel in the closet, investigators found exactly what David had described: multiple bags of methamphetamine, cocaine, and prescription pills with a street value exceeding $150,000. They also found scales, packaging materials, ledgers documenting transactions, and burner phones with incriminating text messages. But the discovery that made everyone's blood run cold was in the spare bedroom, Emma's room. Among her stuffed animals and children's books, investigators found a locked box shoved under the bed. Inside were more drugs, more phones, and photographs documenting transactions. David had been storing evidence in his daughter's bedroom. Detective stood in that little girl's room, surrounded by princess decorations and teddy bears, and felt a wave of anger. Emma had played in this room, slept in this room, while just underneath her bed was enough illegal drugs to put multiple people in prison. The fact that nothing had happened to her, that she hadn't accidentally ingested something, that none of David's criminal associates had harmed her, was nothing short of a miracle. "Bag everything," ordered. "Every single item." This just became a child endangerment case on top of everything else. As the evidence was and removed, Officer led Duke back to the patrol vehicle. The German Shepherd had done his job perfectly, as always. Because of Duke's alert in that courtroom, because of little Emma's brave words, an entire drug distribution operation was being dismantled. Sometimes justice came from the most unexpected sources: a trained police dog and a 3-year-old girl who'd simply told the truth. The evidence room at Denver Police Department's downtown precinct was bustling with activity by late afternoon. Metal shelves lined the walls, each tagged item representing another piece of the puzzle that was David's double life. Detective Sarah stood at the center table, methodically cataloging the seized materials with latex-gloved hands. Each bag of drugs, each burner phone, each handwritten ledger was photographed, weighed, tested, and documented. The process was tedious but crucial. Any mistake in the chain of custody could compromise the entire case. Officer entered with Duke at his side, both looking tired after the intense afternoon. The German Shepherd had worked hard, alerting to 3 separate locations in David's house where drugs had been hidden. Now Duke was officially off duty, though his eyes still tracked every movement in the room with professional interest. "We've got enough here to put away for 10 to 15 years minimum," said without looking up from her documentation. "And that's before we add the child endangerment charges. Once the DA sees that drugs were stored in his daughter's bedroom." She shook her head in disgust, pulled up a chair, letting Duke settle at his feet. "What's bothering me is the scale of this operation. Told us he was just storing and making deliveries to work off a debt. But this much product, this level of organization, he's more involved than he's admitting." Nodded, pulling out one of the ledgers they'd found. "Look at these entries. They go back 18 months. Dates, quantities, initials that probably represent buyers or suppliers. Kept detailed records, which means either he's incredibly stupid or someone required him to document everything." She flipped through pages filled with cryptic notations. "These numbers here, they're not street-level transactions. We're talking bulk distribution." A young forensic analyst named Tommy knocked on the doorframe. "Detective, you're going to want to see this." He carried a tablet displaying photographs of the burner phones they'd seized. "We extracted data from 3 of the phones. There are text message chains going back months, and they reference something called the network. It's not just, this looks like a coordinated distribution ring operating across multiple suburbs." Felt her pulse quicken. What had started as a simple possession charge in a custody hearing was rapidly expanding into something much bigger. How many people are we talking about? At least 7 distinct phone numbers in regular contact with burner phones. Could be more. They use code words for everything, but the pattern is clear. Was a hub in the distribution chain. Product came to him, got subdivided, then went out to other locations. Tommy swiped through more screenshots. "And detective, some of these texts mention kids being present during handoffs. I think wasn't the only one in this network using family homes as cover." The implications hit like a physical blow. If Tommy was right, there were potentially other children being exposed to the same dangers Emma had faced. Other suburban homes hiding criminal operations behind white picket fences and neighborhood barbecues. "I need to brief the lieutenant immediately." This just became a multi-jurisdictional task force investigation. Back at the courthouse, in a quiet room designed for child interviews, Emma sat at a small table with colorful blocks and crayons spread before her. Dr. Lisa Park, a child psychologist specializing in trauma, sat across from her. speaking in the gentle, patient tone she perfected over 2 decades of working with young victims. Emma had been talking more freely now, the immediate fear from the courtroom having subsided into a kind of relieved exhaustion. "Emma, you've been very brave today," Dr. Park said softly. "Can you tell me more about the dogs at Daddy's house, the ones that looked like Duke?" Emma picked up a brown crayon and began drawing on the paper in front of her. Her small hand moved in crude but deliberate strokes: 4 legs, a tail, pointed ears. Big dogs, not nice like Grandma's dog. These dogs had to stay outside in cages. They barked loud, made me scared. Dr. Park made notes on her tablet. Did Daddy have these dogs, or did other people bring them? Other people, the scary men who came at night. Emma switched to a black crayon, adding more figures to her drawing. Daddy said I had to stay in my room when the men came, but I could hear them, loud talking, sometimes yelling. The dogs barked and barked. Sarah watched through a one-way mirror, tears streaming silently down her face. James, her attorney, stood beside her, his own expression grim. Every word from Emma's mouth was being recorded, documented, becoming part of an official record that would ensure David never got near his daughter again. "Mrs., James said quietly, I know this is incredibly difficult to hear, but Emma's testimony is crucial. She's providing details that corroborate the physical evidence. This isn't just going to protect her, it might protect other children too." Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue. "I should have fought harder. I should have refused the visitation. I knew something was wrong." "You did fight," James interrupted firmly. "You raised concerns repeatedly. You documented everything. The system failed you and Emma, not the other way around. Today, finally, the system is listening." Dr. Park was showing Emma pictures now, simple illustrations of different emotions. "When the scary men came with the dogs, how did you feel?" Emma pointed to the picture of a sad, frightened face. "Like this. I wanted Mommy. I tried to call Mommy on Daddy's phone once, but he got mad. He said I couldn't tell Mommy about the men or the dogs. He said it was our secret." Her small voice dropped to a whisper. "But secrets made my tummy hurt." Dr. Park made more notes. "You did the right thing telling us, Emma. Secrets that make your tummy hurt are bad secrets. It's always okay to tell about those." As the interview continued, District Attorney Robert Mitchell arrived at the courthouse, summoned by Judge. He was a tall man with graying temples and the bearing of someone who'd prosecuted serious crimes for 30 years. Judge briefed him in her chambers, laying out the day's extraordinary events with clinical precision. "Your Honor," Mitchell said when she finished, "I'll be charging with possession with intent to distribute, child endangerment, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. Given the evidence, I'm comfortable asking for no bail." "What about the others in this network?" Judge asked. "The detective mentioned there might be more people involved." Mitchell nodded. "We're coordinating with DEA and multiple local jurisdictions. If cooperates, and it sounds like he's inclined to, we'll use his information to roll up the entire operation. But I need to be clear. His cooperation might reduce his sentence, but he's still going to prison for a very long time." "Good," Judge said flatly. "Mr. put his own daughter in danger to serve his addiction and his debts. He doesn't deserve leniency." As evening fell over Denver, the pieces of the investigation continued falling into place. Forensic teams were analyzing the drugs, finding fingerprints and DNA evidence that would connect other members of the network. Digital forensics experts were cracking phones and recovering deleted messages. Surveillance footage from traffic cameras was being pulled to identify vehicles that had visited David's residence during suspected drug transactions. Officer drove home as the sun set, Duke sleeping peacefully in the back seat of the patrol vehicle. The German Shepherd had done what he was trained to do, what he'd done hundreds of times before: detect the presence of illegal substances. But today, that routine detection had saved a child's life and exposed a criminal network that had been operating in plain sight. Thought about Emma, that tiny girl who'd pointed her finger and spoken two simple words that had unraveled everything. She'd been braver than most adults he'd encountered. She'd trusted her instincts even when she couldn't fully understand what she was sensing, and she'd spoken up when it mattered most. "Some partner we've got," Duke said, glancing in the mirror at his sleeping K9. But today, that little girl was the real hero. Duke's ear twitched in his sleep, dreaming perhaps of his successful alerts, his rewards, his sense of purpose fulfilled. In the morning, he'd be ready to work again. But tonight, he'd rest, knowing he'd done his job perfectly. Behind him, in evidence rooms and interview rooms and holding cells across Denver, the machinery of justice ground forward, powered by the unlikely alliance of a 3-year-old's courage and a police dog's trained nose. Sometimes that's all it took to change everything. 3 weeks had passed since that extraordinary day in Courtroom 4B. The story had exploded across Denver media. Police dog and toddler exposed drug ring in custody hearing. Read the headline in the Denver Post. Local news stations ran the story for days, carefully protecting Emma's identity but celebrating the unlikely heroes who'd brought down what authorities were now calling the Suburban Network, a sophisticated drug distribution operation that had been operating in middle-class neighborhoods for nearly 2 years. Sarah sat in the waiting room of Dr. Lisa Park's private practice, a child psychology clinic decorated with warm colors and cheerful artwork designed to make young patients feel safe. Emma was inside having her 3rd therapy session. Sarah came to every appointment, waiting anxiously for the hour to pass, hoping that her daughter could heal from the trauma she'd been exposed to without even understanding it. The weight of guilt still pressed on Sarah's chest like a physical burden. Every night she lay awake thinking about all the weekends she'd sent Emma to David's house, all the times her daughter had returned anxious and withdrawn, all the signs she'd seen but couldn't prove. The custody evaluator's words still haunted her. "Mrs., you need to stop projecting your anger at your ex-husband onto your daughter. Your concerns appear to be unfounded and potentially alienating." Unfounded, the word tasted bitter even now. But Dr. Park had been clear during their first family session. "Sarah, you did exactly what you should have done. You documented your concerns. You sought help through proper channels. You never gave up on protecting your daughter. The system failed you both, not the other way around." The door to Dr. Park's office opened, and Emma emerged holding the psychologist's hand. The little girl looked tired but calmer than she had in months. She clutched a new stuffed animal, a plush German shepherd that Officer and Duke had given her during a follow-up visit. Emma had named it Hero and refused to sleep without it. "How did it go?" Sarah asked Dr. Park, though Emma was right there. They'd learned to speak openly, no more secrets, no more things that made Emma's tummy hurt. "We had a good session," Dr. Park said with an encouraging smile. Emma was able to talk about some of the scary things she saw at her father's house. "We're working on helping her understand that none of what happened was her fault, and that speaking up about scary things is always the right choice." Emma climbed into her mother's lap, fitting perfectly into Sarah's arms the way she had since she was an infant. "Mommy, Dr. Lisa says I was brave, like a superhero." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. "You were brave, baby. You were so brave." Dr. Park gestured for Sarah to step aside for a moment while Emma played with the toys in the waiting room. In the hallway, the psychologist's expression became more serious. "I want to prepare you for something. As Emma processes her trauma, she may have nightmares or behavioral regression. She might become clingy or have separation anxiety. These are all normal responses to what she's been through." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. "What exactly did she see? I know you can't tell me everything from your sessions, but as her mother." "She witnessed drug transactions," Dr. Park said gently but directly. "She saw her father and other men exchanging packages. She heard arguments, possibly threats. The guard dogs you've heard about were likely brought by David's associates for protection during these exchanges. Emma didn't understand what was happening, but children are remarkably perceptive. She knew something was dangerous and wrong. Sarah felt her knees weaken. She was 3 years old, which is why she couldn't articulate what she was experiencing. Young children don't have the vocabulary or conceptual framework to say, "I witnessed illegal drug activity." But they can feel fear. They can sense danger. And when Emma saw Duke in that courtroom, her young mind made the connection. Police dog equals the scary dogs at Daddy's house equals danger. Her reaction was pure survival instinct. "Will she be okay?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "Long-term, will this damage her?" Dr. Park placed a compassionate hand on Sarah's shoulder. Children are remarkably resilient, especially when they have a supportive, loving parent and proper therapeutic intervention. Emma has both. She'll carry some memories of this experience, but with continued therapy and your unwavering support, she'll heal. The fact that you removed her from that situation and that justice is being served will help her understand that bad things don't go unpunished, that speaking up matters, and that her mother will always protect her. They returned to the waiting room where Emma was playing with blocks, humming to herself. She looked up and smiled at her mother, a genuine, unguarded smile that Sarah hadn't seen in months. Meanwhile, across the city in the Denver County Jail, David sat in an orange jumpsuit in a small attorney conference room. His new lawyer, a public defender named Freeman who specialized in drug cases, sat across from him with a thick file of discovery materials. David looked like he'd aged 20 years in 3 weeks. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by prison wear. His carefully styled hair had grown shaggy. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. "The DA's offer is on the table," Freeman said, sliding a document across the table. "You testify against the other members of the network. You provide detailed information about suppliers and distribution methods, and they'll recommend 12 years with possibility of parole after 8. You'll also have to forfeit all assets seized during the investigation." David stared at the paper without really seeing it. 12 years. Emma would be 15 when he got out. She wouldn't remember him except as the bad man she'd pointed at in court. "What if I don't take the deal?" "Then you go to trial, and with the evidence they have, the drugs found in your possession and your home, the phones, the ledgers, Emma's testimony, the K-9 alert, you're looking at 25 to 30 years. You'd be in your 60s when you got out." Freeman leaned forward. "David, I've reviewed your case thoroughly. This is the best deal you're going to get. Take it." David's hands trembled as he picked up the pen. He thought about Emma's face in that courtroom, the pure terror in her eyes. He'd done that to her. His addiction, his weakness, his criminal choices had traumatized his own daughter. Does Sarah know about the offer? "The DA will inform her counsel. She'll have the opportunity to provide a victim impact statement at your sentencing." Freeman paused. "I have to ask, did you ever consider what you were exposing your daughter to?" David's eyes filled with tears. "Every day, every single day I told myself I'd stop, that I'd get clean, that I'd get out of the network, but I was in too deep. They threatened me, threatened Emma if I tried to leave. I thought I was protecting her by keeping quiet and playing along." He laughed bitterly. "Instead, I was the one putting her in danger." "That realization doesn't excuse your actions, but it might help explain them to the judge," Freeman said. "If you show genuine remorse and cooperation, it could influence the sentencing within the plea agreement guidelines." David signed the document, his hand shaking so badly the signature was barely legible. "Tell Sarah I'm sorry. Tell her I know she'll never forgive me and I don't deserve forgiveness. But tell her I'm sorry." Freeman collected the papers. "You can tell her yourself at the sentencing hearing. Whether she'll listen is another matter." That evening, Sarah tucked Emma into bed in their small apartment. They'd moved after the investigation, needing a fresh start away from the old neighborhood and its memories. Emma clutched Hero, her stuffed German shepherd, and looked up at her mother with sleepy eyes. "Mommy, is Daddy in jail because he was a bad man?" Sarah had been dreading this conversation but knew it had to happen. She sat on the edge of Emma's bed and chose her words carefully. "Daddy made some very bad choices that hurt people and put you in danger. Yes, he's in jail because of those choices. But that doesn't mean he didn't love you. Sometimes people we love make terrible mistakes." "Dr. Lisa says it's not my fault." "It's absolutely not your fault, sweetheart. None of this is your fault." Sarah kissed Emma's forehead. "You were brave and honest, and because of that you're safe now. You'll always be safe with me." Emma yawned, her eyes already closing. "I liked Duke. Can we get a dog someday?" Sarah smiled through fresh tears. "Maybe someday, baby, maybe someday." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Sarah sat in the dim glow of watching her daughter's peaceful breathing. The road ahead would be long therapy sessions, court proceedings, rebuilding their lives. But they'd survived. More than that, they'd triumphed. Emma had spoken up when it mattered most, and that courage had not only saved her but potentially other children whose parents were part of the same network. Outside, the Denver night was clear and cool. In a kennel at the Denver Police Department, Duke slept in his comfortable bed, his police vest hanging on a nearby hook, ready for tomorrow's shift. And in Courtroom 4B, now empty and dark, justice had been served in the most unexpected way. All because a 3-year-old girl had pointed her finger and spoken 2 simple words: "Bad man." Sometimes the truth comes from the most innocent voices. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning in Courtroom 4B. The Colorado autumn painted Denver in brilliant golds and reds, and the crisp air carried the promise of new beginnings. Today, the same courtroom would serve as the setting for David's sentencing hearing, the final chapter in a story that had captivated the city and changed multiple lives forever. Sarah arrived early, dressed in a simple navy suit, her hand firmly gripping Emma's. The little girl had grown in the past months, taller, more confident, with a spark of resilience in her blue eyes that hadn't been there before. Emma wore her favorite purple dress, and clutched in her other hand was Hero, the stuffed German shepherd that had become her constant companion. Dr. Park had encouraged bringing the toy today, explaining that familiar comfort items helped children feel secure during stressful events. The courtroom was fuller than it had been for the custody hearing. Media representatives lined the back rows. This case had become a symbol of hidden dangers in suburban America, of how addiction and crime could lurk behind perfect facades. Victims' advocates filled several benches, and in a special section reserved for law enforcement, officer sat in full uniform with Duke resting at his feet, the German shepherd's presence as calm and professional as always. Judge entered, her expression solemn. The past 6 months had been extraordinary for her as well. She'd presided over thousands of cases in her career, but this one would be the story she told at legal conferences, the case study she'd used to teach young judges to trust their instincts and listen to even the smallest voices. David was led in by 2 bailiffs, his hands cuffed, wearing an orange jumpsuit that seemed to swallow his now gaunt frame. When his eyes found Emma across the courtroom, his face crumpled. The little girl stared at him for a long moment, then pressed closer to her mother, clutching Hero. "Mr. Judge," began, her voice carrying the weight of authority and disappointment, "you have pleaded guilty to possession with intent to distribute controlled substances, child endangerment, and participating in a continuing criminal enterprise. Before I pronounce sentence, I'm going to hear victim impact statements. Mrs., would you like to proceed?" Sarah stood, her legs trembling but her voice steady. She'd practiced this statement for weeks, working with her therapist to express her feelings without breaking down. "Your Honor, members of the court, 6 months ago I stood in this room fighting for my daughter's safety. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't prove it. I was called vindictive, alienating, unstable. I was made to feel like I was the problem." She turned to look directly at David. "You exposed our daughter, our 3-year-old daughter, to drug dealers, to criminal activity, to dangers that could have killed her. You stored drugs in her bedroom under her bed, where she played with her toys and said her prayers at night. You threatened her into silence, made her keep secrets that gave her nightmares. You prioritized your addiction and your criminal activity over her safety, over her childhood, over everything a parent is supposed to protect. David's head dropped, tears streaming down his face. Sarah continued, her voice stronger now. But Emma is healing. She's in therapy, she's learning to feel safe again, and she's discovering that speaking the truth, no matter how scary, is always the right choice. She stopped your operation. She saved herself. And because of her courage, other children in your network were also removed from danger. Our daughter did what you should have done months or years ago. She chose what was right over what was easy. She returned to her seat, Emma climbing into her lap immediately. The little girl whispered, "Did I do good, Mommy?" Sarah kissed her head. "You did perfect, baby." Detective Sarah was called next. She detailed the investigation that Emma and Duke's alert had triggered. 7 arrests, 3 pounds of various controlled substances seized, the dismantling of a distribution network that had been operating across 4 suburban communities. Because of the evidence we obtained from Mr.'s cooperation, we've been able to prosecute 11 individuals involved in this network. More importantly, we've identified and protected 4 other children who were being exposed to similar conditions in other homes. Officer was invited to speak next. He approached the bench with Duke walking perfectly at his side. "Your Honor, I've been a K-9 officer for 12 years. Duke has made hundreds of narcotics detections, but this case was different. This case shows why we do this work, not just to catch criminals but to protect the vulnerable. Duke did his job that day, but the real hero was Emma, a 3-year-old girl who trusted her instincts and spoke up when it mattered most." Looked at Emma and smiled. The little girl waved shyly at Duke, who wagged his tail in response. Finally, Judge turned to David. "Mister, do you wish to address the court before sentencing?" David stood shakily, his voice hoarse. "Your Honor, there's nothing I can say that makes this better. I destroyed my daughter's sense of safety. I traumatized her. I betrayed every responsibility I had as a father." He turned towards Sarah and Emma, though Emma buried her face in her mother's shoulder. "Emma, I know you can't understand this now, maybe you never will, but I'm so sorry. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. Your mother is right. You're the brave one. You're the hero. I hope someday you can have a good life, even if I'm not part of it." Judge let the silence settle before speaking. "Mister, I've reviewed the plea agreement, your cooperation with authorities, and the evidence presented. While your assistance in dismantling this criminal network is noted, it doesn't erase the profound harm you caused, particularly to your own daughter. The court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after serving 8 years. You are permanently stripped of all parental rights. You will have no contact with Emma unless she, as an adult, chooses to initiate it. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," David whispered. "Furthermore," Judge continued, "I'm ordering you to complete substance abuse treatment while incarcerated and to pay restitution to cover Emma's therapy costs. Bailiff, remove the defendant." As David was led away, he looked back one last time at his daughter. Emma peeked over her mother's shoulder, watching him go with an expression too complex for a 3-year-old. Confusion, relief, sadness, all mixed together. Outside the courthouse, media gathered for a press conference. Detective addressed the cameras while Officer stood beside her with Duke. "Today's sentencing represents justice not just for one family but for a community. We want to remind parents to trust their instincts. If something feels wrong, keep asking questions, keep pushing for answers." Sarah did everything right, and her persistence, combined with her daughter's courage and excellent police work, brought down a significant criminal operation. A reporter called out, "What happens to Emma now?" Sarah stepped forward, Emma on her hip. "Emma is healing. She's strong, she's loved, and she's safe. We're moving forward one day at a time, and we're grateful to Judge, to Officer, and Duke, to everyone who finally listened and took action." "Emma, do you want to say anything?" another reporter asked gently. Emma looked at the cameras shyly, then at Duke. "I like the doggy," she said simply, which made everyone laugh. Then more seriously she added, "Bad man gone now, I'm safe." Those simple words, "I'm safe," captured everything. 3 months later, on a crisp December morning, Officer received a call to visit Emma's preschool for a special K-9 demonstration. When he arrived with Duke, Emma ran up to them, her face glowing with excitement. She'd drawn a picture for Duke, a crayon drawing of a German shepherd with a big red heart. "This is for Hero," Emma explained, using Duke's real name now, "because he helped save me." Knelt down so Emma could pet Duke properly. The German shepherd sat patiently, his tail wagging as the little girl wrapped her arms around his neck. "Duke is very proud of you," told her. "You know what? You helped him do his job that day. You were his partner." Emma beamed at that idea. As and Duke demonstrated their work to the delighted preschoolers, Sarah watched from the sidelines with tears in her eyes, happy tears this time. Her daughter was laughing, playing, thriving. The nightmares had decreased. The anxiety was fading. Emma was becoming herself again, but stronger, with a story of courage that would stay with her forever. That evening, in homes across Denver, the story was told and retold. How a 3-year-old girl and a police dog had become unlikely heroes. How speaking up had saved lives. How justice could come from the most unexpected places. In the Denver Police Department's K-9 unit, Duke's story was added to the training manual as an example of how police dogs' work extends far beyond simple detection. They protect, they serve, and sometimes they help give voice to those who cannot speak for themselves. And in a small apartment across town, Sarah tucked Emma into bed as she did every night. Emma clutched Hero, her stuffed companion, and looked up at her mother with complete trust and love. "Mommy, Dr. Lisa says I'm a hero too." "You absolutely are, sweetheart. You're my hero and you always will be." Emma smiled and closed her eyes, drifting into peaceful sleep. The sleep of a child who knew she was safe, who knew she was loved, who knew that her voice mattered. Outside, the stars sparkled over Denver, and justice rested, knowing that on one extraordinary day in a courthouse, the truth had been spoken by the smallest, bravest voice of all.